Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you're listening to a weekly podcast about books and life. Not necessarily in that order. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show on iTunes, or use our RSS feed with your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/vm. We're also on Twitter, Instagram, and SoundCloud at vmspod, on Facebook at facebook.com/virtualmemoriesshow, and on Tumblr at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com. There's also a YouTube page, so if you go to youtube.com and search for Virtual Memories, you'll find about 50 or 60 past episodes, just a still image with lots of audio. Now, you can support this podcast and get access to exclusive content with a recurring monthly donation via Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/vmspod and set up your level of support. Every week, you'll get new material from our patron-only blog, and you'll also get to listen to my bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet, which features extra material from our guests and is only available to supporters of the show. So visit patreon.com/vmspod or paypal.me/vmspod and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. Speaking of every week, it is, in fact, another crazy week or more ahead of me. I'm off to Washington Tuesday morning for some lobbying. I'm posting this the night before. Then I will be engaged in deep anxiety over the markup session for this bill that I worked on for about a year. If that all comes together, either way, I will be off to the Great White North after that for the annual Toronto Comic Arts Festival, also known as TCAF, back for a day or so, and then off to a conference in Philadelphia. So I apologize if I seem a little rushed and anxious here, but the good thing is I went into psychoanalysis. Well, actually, I went into a psychoanalyst's office, to be precise. In fact, this week's guest is Vanessa Sinclair, a psychoanalyst and psychologist based in New York City. We met at one of the great parties that people don't realize they shouldn't invite me to, and that's where I met Vanessa, heard about her renegade psychoanalysis approach, and that she's also a witch. Which I mean in the best possible way. See, it turns out that she collaborates on art and occult art, I guess, or occult stuff with Caitlin Foisey, this amazing artist and witch I met a few years ago at another party I shouldn't have been invited to. Caitlin and I made noises about recording a show, but never really got the opportunity before she moved to Chicago. Luckily, Caitlin and Vanessa have a pretty heavy-duty third mind gestalt going on, creating art around the cut-up principles of, and sort of enumerated by William Burroughs and Brian Gysin. Vanessa will go into that during the episode, and she'll explain it a lot better than I can. But the upshot is, Vanessa told me she had a book of cut-up poetry coming out, which is now out, called Switching Mirrors, and that she's co-founder of a free association of psychoanalysts called Das Unbehagen. I figured, geez, that's right up my alley. I can't go wrong with recording a show like this. Which, of course, I neurotically prefaced when sitting down with her by talking about how I've never been in therapy of any kind, except when I blew out my knee back in college. Anyway, that's all neither here nor there. The upshot is I got a really neat conversation in about a subject I really didn't know an awful lot about. And now I'm going to inflict it on you. Anyway, Vanessa's new book is Switching Mirrors from Trap Art Press. She has a lot of other projects going on, and she talks about those during our conversation. And we'll also talk about the websites you can go to learn more about both her art and the free psychoanalysis association that she's in. Anyway, here's Vanessa's bio. Vanessa Sinclair, Psy-D, is a psychoanalyst and clinical psychologist in private practice in New York City. She is a founding member of Das Unbehagen, a free association for psychoanalysis, which facilitates psychoanalytic lectures, classes, and events in and around New York City. Together with artist Caitlin Foisey, she explores the magic and artistic expression of the cut-up method and the third mind. You can learn more about that at www.chaosofthethirdmind.com. She contributes to a variety of publications, including the Fenris Wolf, Division Review, a quarterly psychoanalytic forum, Eris Magazine, and the Brooklyn Rail. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Vanessa Sinclair. Well, why don't we start by telling me about magic?
That's a big question.
Yeah, it is.
I guess I'll orient that towards magic in my life, since that seems most natural. Well, maybe not even. I guess my idea of magic and why it's not such a taboo word, or shouldn't be such a taboo word, is that instead of seeing it as something supernatural or like otherworldly, I think it's very much a part of the natural and the way the world works. And I think it's more societal's view about it that makes it seem weird or strange or uncanny, or like out of the ordinary. My experience is that, like, as a society, it's kind of looked at as like something crazy or weird or strange or something you shouldn't pay attention to, or people, I mean, in psychiatry, they even have the phrase magical thinking. And that means that you're symptomatic, and that can lead you down a road that becomes like chronic mental illness, where you have psychosis and you end up not being able to take care of yourself. So in that way, it's really, really looked down upon. But when you talk to individuals, like pretty much 99% of the people that come to my office, they all have something that's happened to them, like somebody's passed away or an ancestor, or, you know, just some sort of like synchronicity or coincidental experience that happens that feels uncanny or feels like it has meaning. And they're told by the outer society that they shouldn't pay attention to that. And at this point, as my views have evolved over time, I really think that society tells you not to pay attention to those things, because it actually empowers you if you do start paying attention to those things. And it does help people make meaning in their lives, and it can lead to other things that can be beneficial and positive, actually, and not necessarily down this road of like psychosis. And I think that part of the stigma is what leads people to become more paranoid and afraid of their own experiences, rather than it being inherent in those experiences. Because when I experience those kinds of synchronicities, I feel like I'm on the right track, and that makes me feel encouraged. And it seems like a lot of people have those experiences, so I try to reframe that for them when they come up, because they'll come into my office and they think, oh, I'm a doctor. They'll say, oh, you're a scientist, you're a doctor. I know you're going to think this is crazy. They're afraid to tell their psychiatrist because they're afraid the psychiatrist is going to medicate them. And I just let them know that they should listen to their own internal experience and their experience of the world over what society tells them to think.
And what was that evolution like for you? Did you come from a essentially rationalist, materialist perspective previously?
Yeah. Basically, when I was younger, like when I was a child and an adolescent, I was much more, into the earth and climbing around in trees when I was a kid. I'm from Miami, so it was like I'll spend a lot of time outdoors. I had these huge banyan trees in my backyard, so like a lot of time swinging on vines. So I had all sorts of imaginary friends and like tree spirits and land spirits and little animals I would talk to and all this sort of thing. And then, of course, as an adolescent, my family's not, but I'm from Miami, where a lot of the population practices Santeria. So, because Miami's like 90% Spanish speaking. And so like there's a lot of Catholicism, which in itself can be very, ritualized and magical in ways. And then a lot of Santeria. So I had a lot of friends whose parents and families practice Santeria. And because it wasn't in my family, it did seem a little like other and like, all these coincidences and stuff would happen more like around them or around their houses and that sort of thing. And it was a bit unnerving. But it was also very interesting. And, there were experiences I was having, not just watching the families having them. So I definitely was interested in it. But then when I moved away and I started graduate school in psychology, it definitely got trained out of me. Like any sort of magical thinking, I saw that it was a symptom. You have to learn the whole DSM and how to diagnose people. And like medical students, it happens to psychology students too, where you start seeing I have all of these symptoms. What's wrong with me? You start diagnosing yourself. But basically the problem with the training in psychology, first of all, it's a 5-year degree to get a doctorate, and literally we read one paper by Freud the whole time, which I thought was ridiculous. And second of all, it's really just tailored at this point to the medical industry, and learning the diagnoses, learning the pharmaceuticals, learning CBT, and all these behavioral treatments to help get rid of people's symptoms, but not necessarily figure out what the underlying reason for the symptoms are in the first place. So my entry into psychology was because I did like Freud and Jung, and I loved all the mystical stuff in Jung and the archetypes and the mythology. And I was reading them in high school. And then when I was in undergraduate, I was a psychology major there as well. And we learned Skinner and Pavlov and all these behavioral theorists. But we also learned about Freud and emotional IQ and this sort of thing. And I had just assumed going into graduate school that people understood that these are all parts of the human experience, and that behavioral therapy could work in certain ways, for an addiction, or if you're needing to make sure that you're getting out of the house 3 times a week because you're super depressed, and sure, that's useful. It's useful to go to the gym. It's useful to go to yoga. But that doesn't solve everything. And cognitive behavioral is helpful. And sure, if you can, if you start seeing yourself going through this negative pattern of thinking, and you see this kind of hole that you're falling into, if you can start reframing that and help yourself see things in a different way to pull yourself out of that, that's a great skill to have. But to me, those are coping skills for day-to-day life. But that shouldn't be the whole of psychoanalytic or psychiatric or psychological treatment. I assumed that then those kinds of things were more coping skills, so that then people could do the talk therapy, or even medication is more to help manage symptoms, so that people can then do the talk therapy and figure out what their body is saying to them, why they're having panic attacks, why they're having gastrointestinal problems. There's something wrong, and you have to figure out what it is so that the symptoms go away. If you just mask them or medicate them, they're not going to ever go away because you didn't listen to yourself, basically. So I just kind of assumed that people understood that, because I understood that. And then I went to graduate school, and it was not that way at all. So, but basically, in order to finish the program, you just have to do what they want you to do, rather than what you actually think is correct, which is also a big problem. And even at the end of school, you have to take something called a clinical competency exam, which is where you present one of your cases to faculty that weren't your supervisors, and kind of explain what you did and how you treated them, and defend yourself. And when I was doing that, I had one psychoanalytic supervisor that let me keep a patient for one rotation for 3 years. So I saw her twice a week for 3 years, which was a great experience. But then the 2 people that were on this panel were not psychoanalytic at all. They were very behavioral treatment people. And so when I presented this case, they basically told me if I didn't diagnose this patient with a personality disorder, then I was unethical and they were going to fail me, because we know for a fact that you can cure depression in 6 to 8 sessions if you use this method, this cognitive behavioral method, which is absurd. So I basically just learned to do what I was told, and I didn't really buy it, but I bought it enough because it was part of my survival, Yeah. And I had to kind of unlearn everything I learned and start seeing the whole field of psychology the way I actually see it, the way I saw it before, which took several years, honestly, working in hospitals too, they tell you, like, if you treat someone analytically, you're being unethical. Like, that's the view. It's better just to give them medication so they feel better and can basically go back to work, you know?
Treating people like production units instead of people.
Exactly.
Jeez. Mm-hmm. So where does psychoanalysis go wrong? Or where did the psychiatric world go wrong?
Yeah, they're two different things at this point. I think it's really been a problem for a long time.
I will say, by the way, we will get to your book soon.
That's okay. Well, there's two things to say. One, as far as magic goes and magical thinking, I don't even want to go that way. As far as the psychiatric world, I think in America, it's pretty much always been problematic. Because our psychology programs are really tied into like the military, and this kind of government, and governing of people. So America's always really seen, like this whole past century, really seen people as production units. And they didn't even really give much cred to anything psychological until they started having people come back from wars, traumatized, and they were like trying to understand shell shock and like PTSD and this sort of thing. And so it really wasn't until like the 50s that they even really acknowledged what a psychological damage was in that way, and like how it was just as detrimental in some ways as like physical traumas. So yeah, I think it's always been pretty problematic. I think sometime after the 50s, when psychoanalysis fell out of favor, like I think everybody they really hated it at first. The Nazis, of course, like completely banned it. And then it like came into popularity after World War II, and everybody was like into looking at themselves and this sort of thing. But I feel like kind of culturally, we then like repressed ourselves again. Like we let ourselves like look in there and have things come up, and then we had like the 60s, and then like everyone like pharmaceuticals started coming into vogue and like being created more and more and being more useful, and then we kind of just repressed that and like went back to this very superficial, symptomatic way of thinking. And before that, like psychiatrists and psychoanalysts, all the psychiatrists were trained as psychoanalysts. But now psychiatrists hardly know anything about psychological treatment at all, really. Like I actually was going to go to medical school first, instead of graduate school, and took the MCAT and everything to prepare. And then I was looking at med schools, and like they literally take like 2 psychology classes in their whole training. And then they do their like, residencies in, an inpatient unit in a hospital working with like schizophrenics. And that wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to do this kind of, private practice, sort of thing. So, so it's no wonder that psychiatrists usually just throw medication at people, because they're really only used to treating people that have really severe problems. And not everybody needs medication. Most people don't.
So what problem would you say I have? I'm just kidding. I don't actually have any problems
neurotic.
at all. Yeah, but that's that just starts with being a Jew from the Northeast, et cetera, 21st century and all that.
It functions. I think if it functions, that's another thing though. I think if it functions well enough, like you should just kind of work with yourself and with your symptom instead of trying to change yourself.
Oh yeah, no, I think micromanaging control freak has gotten me this far. Imposter syndrome also. Oh, I didn't say that. Never mind. But tell me about switching mirrors. Tell me about the
how it came to be.
Yeah.
And how
and the whole cut up thing behind it.
And doing this.
Yeah.
So I basically started. I write a lot of like art reviews and this sort of thing, just for fun. In addition to like academic papers.
I would sneer at that, but then I'm the guy who goes around doing interviews like this every week. Yeah. So yeah.
This is what we do. You need it. You have to have art and creativity. I think that's key. And honestly, after doing psychoanalysis for so long, I love it. But I honestly think at this point, everyone should just have something creative that they do. I feel like if everyone was doing something creative, the world would just be a better place, period. Just channeling their energy that way. But yeah, I was working on a bunch of art papers, and then I started kind of developing this idea of the cut in psychoanalysis, which is a Lacanian concept. It's called scansion, and he actually like cuts the session short at certain points, or like makes sure to make his interpretations at moments that kind of highlight the idea that the patient just brought up, so that instead of, like, you'll see when you have patients, they come in and they kind of get used to this like 45, 50-minute structure. And so like they'll take a while to open up, and then they'll like open, and then they'll like close it all back down. Or they'll like kind of tread water, and then like right at the end they'll like drop a bomb and they'll leave, you know? And people kind of get used to the time, even if you hide your clock or anything like that, they get like an internal clock. So in order to avoid those kinds of things, when a patient hit a point that seemed very resonant and important to their story, he would just like cut them off right there and kind of kick them out of the office, so that they would leave thinking like, well, why did that just happen? And start thinking about it and kind of keep the analytic process going outside of the room, instead of like saying something really important and then closing it all down and then leaving and like going on with their day without really thinking about it. So I was thinking about that, and I've always really loved like Burroughs and Geisen and that sort of stuff, industrial music. So I've always liked like music that interrupts and that sort of thing. And then I started realizing, when I was thinking about like how to kind of thread these things together in psychoanalytic theory and write about it, I printed out every paper I'd written in the past like few years, and I started realizing that all the artists that I write about use the cut in some way, whether it's like ritualistically, where they're like cutting their skin or doing surgery, or like they're film editors, or they're like musicians that cut their music in certain ways, or painters that use like Egon Schiele is like cutting off arms and legs out of the visual. Or collage, anything like that. So I realized that everybody sort of did this. So I thought, I should write a book about this, and kind of have the first chapter or the first part talking about my theory and like fleshing that out, and then using the work of these different artists to kind of show examples of like what this looks like in real life, or the ways people use this every day or in different ways. And then I also realized that all the different painters or artists that I had written about also wrote in some way, whether they wrote formally or they had like memoirs that were published. Like Jarek Jarman was a filmmaker, but they published all his memoirs, something like that. So I decided to start cutting up the articles that I wrote about these people, and just like cutting up my writing with my writing. Which when I started doing that, I started seeing what Burroughs and Geisen were talking about when you do the cut-ups and they're kind of speaking back to you. It's like really, really magical and uncanny. And sometimes they say like things that resonate so much and like really strike a chord, but that you really wouldn't have been able to put together yourself. You kind of have to get out of your own ego and get out of your own way and see your words rearranged for you. And then I started also writing, like, say, the article I wrote about someone, and cutting that together with something that they wrote, so I could see what we would say together, or like put us in a conversation kind of thing. And then I just became obsessed with that. And I just like went on this huge tangent. This is like 3 years ago now. And I just started like doing that instead, and haven't gone back to this original idea, but I think once I move, I'm going to sit down and focus on that more, but I don't think there's really any point until I move. So it's only 4 months away now. So I just became obsessed with these cut-ups and like doing them in different ways. Burroughs would always say that every author is in their words. So if you like have read an author and read everything they've written or all their poems, and you like love it, but you're kind of tired of it because you've read it all, like cut up their poems and rearrange them, and it's still them speaking, but it's like them saying new things. And I love that idea, and I've really found that to be true. Now I've done it for too long to keep track, but when I was first doing it, I knew by just the way things were phrased or the different fonts that were used from the different cutouts, like who was actually speaking in the cut up each line, and who I was pulling out. And it was really interesting to see not only what it was saying, but like who was speaking at that point in time. And then a friend of mine pointed out, who's also like a pagan magical practitioner that I hadn't really thought of, but pretty much everyone in that book is a magical practitioner in some ways. Like Caitlin's in the book, Carl Abrahamson's in the book, Briar Peorge is in the book, Derek Jarman, John Balance of Coil, and they were all occultists, Burroughs and Geisen. So it's like you have this whole book of all these magical people jumbled together. And so she pointed out that it's really good to use for like bibliomancy, like just open it up to a page and see what it has to say. And it's like somebody giving you a message that you might need. So that was a nice result.
Yeah, I was going to say when I opened it, the fact that they're all the same font, everything is simply typeset the same. You don't know what the sources are per se. I was also going to make a joke about starting with those little fridge magnets with all the words on them, but you know,
those are cut-ups.
Yeah, you know, in a way. And then if you're in an office situation, someone will always, you know, spell out a dirty message with that stuff. But did you have any experience with James Merrill's poetry, by the way? The Ouija board stuff? It's a different phenomenon completely, but The Changing Light of Sandover was apparently dictated to him and his partner by Ouija board, which he then edited but lightly into poetry, which I know is not the same as what you're talking about, but you know,
but
it's similarly
still like getting a message.
Yeah. There's transmissions as opposed to the thing itself.
And that's one thing I'll say about psychology and magic too, is that like I said, I was more open to the magical thinking when I was younger, but even that's like stigmatized, like, oh, that's when you were an adolescent or when you were in college.
Childish, blah, blah,
right?
blah.
Yeah, like primitive, childish. But when I first started coming back to magic after I had gone through all this psychological training, and had gotten more of a rational worldview, I definitely looked at it in a way that it was all projections of our mind, more like the Jungian way of looking at it as like archetypes, and things that are more in our mind, and went back to being open to like, okay, maybe it's a collective consciousness that we share, but it was still like this like mental construct idea. And then since then, in the past few years, I've had enough experiences that now my view is more, I feel like that's very narcissistic of humans to think that we're the only ones walking around, whether we can see other things or people or whatever, beings or not. And that to think that it's a projection of our mind is just very self-centered, unless you think of it as the way that like we can only understand something incoming through our mind. Fine, that makes sense. Or if you want to really expand like the idea of the mind.
Again, to the collective unconscious.
Into the collective and beyond.
Yeah.
Then that would be okay. But yeah.
But you feel it's too anthrocentric otherwise to say that these things are just manifestations of our perception.
Yeah.
Okay. What brought you into psychiatry to begin with? Do you remember who you were back then? I had to ask, but
no, I had a friend from high school who also became a psychoanalyst. I won't use her name. But when we were in high school, we were kind of into this more like ghost hunting thing. And we used to joke that we were both into Freud and Jung and reading philosophy then. But we were really into like parapsychology and the uncanny and the unknown. And we used to have a plan that we would like be, parapsychologists together, like ghost hunters, and like go to different people's houses and see what was going on there. Yeah, that was in high school, but we both ended up being psychoanalysts. It's kind of funny.
Do you want to go back to that at some point or not?
I mean, it seems like it's making its way in.
Is there a sort of shamanistic thing behind it? Because I remember being into this when I was in college myself. Reading, at the time it was Mondo 2000, which, pushed me into a whole bunch of, like Geisen and other authors. There was that weird primal shamanistic thing, about it. Do you see it as a sort of continuum with ancient rite, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could be. I think everybody's experience is very individual, but I definitely, like this past Sunday, I had a workshop here from a friend named Langston Kahn, who is more of a shaman, and he was doing something called emotional clearing, and like I understood the techniques and what he was going for, and like talking to like kind of your inner child sort of thing. But like it's the same way with Caitlin. Sometimes when I'm around these people, I realize that like the medium that they're using isn't really what it is. It's more this person that's some sort of healer or something. Like, I feel like Caitlin is very intuitive and like she could read the carpet. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter if she's reading cards or tea leaves or the clouds or your face or whatever. I feel like it's more like she just has this innate sense of things, and she's able to use these tools to like be able to talk to you about it. Whereas if she was just telling you, you might be a little more freaked out. I don't know if she agrees with that at all, but that's kind of how I see her. And Langston the same way. I feel like he just has this sort of, I feel like I'm being like too hippy-dippy, but I just feel like he's like some sort of healer, and like this is how he's figured out how to help people with it, is through these kinds of workshops and that sort of thing. So in that way, I think it's more of a shamanistic, way of being. I think some people might just have a more innate ability, and some people are able to learn it, I suppose, you know. Mm-hmm. I think it just has to be very individual. Langston always talks about the problem with our culture being that there's no like passage of initiation, and that those kinds of rites are very important for humans. And I tend to agree with that as well. Like, we don't have a passage of initiation until like adolescence or adulthood, unless you're like Jewish, you have a bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, but like most of Western culture doesn't, you know? And it's a shame because there's no kind of marker where people like learn to take responsibility, or like, this is where we're going to next. There's no sort of framework to step in to. Everyone's kind of just reaching around, you know?
I used to think, before I started doing this show, I thought my generation was the holy crap. We basically are still kids. We don't understand even in our 40s, you know, we're not growing up. And then I started interviewing a few guests in their early 60s and realized they had the exact same thing. Yeah. They were like, yeah, my parents were the ones who were responsible, not me. And, you know, I was like, oh, thank God it's not just our generation. And I assume, you know, the kids today, you know, won't even.
They feel the same way.
Or they won't even have that level of introspection because, you know, God forbid they think as much as I do. But what's the collaborative process like for you? What's it like working with other people in something that seems simultaneously personal and yet, you know, again, part of some collective way of approaching the world?
Well, I definitely like networking, and I like collaborating and like synthesizing. I've always been someone who likes, like, if I meet two people and I think they should meet, I always like make sure they meet. Or I like bringing two things that seem very disparate and like putting them together to see what happens, or like what you can create that's new from these two different kind of fields, which is how I ended up doing like this psychoanalysis, art, and occult, and bringing these kinds of worlds together that originally were all very central to psychoanalysis. Like the occult was something they looked at a lot, and then it ended up getting split off when Freud and Jung split, and kind of all the occult business went to the Jungians, and the Freudians became very scientific, which isn't really. I feel like psychoanalysis itself is like a creative process. And, you know, it's not a science per se, but even science isn't a science per se. In a lot of ways, I feel like, they make everything sound like this is fact, or we know this, but everything's constantly changing. These are all just ideas and hypotheses that we're constantly proving and then disproving. So, I feel like nothing is as static as people like to make it out to be. But working with Caitlin, definitely is other level compared to other collaborations. And I thought I read The Third Mind like in high school, and, you know, I just thought I knew what Burroughs and Geisen meant, but, I don't think I really got their work until I started doing the cut-ups myself, and then working with Caitlin. Like, I was doing them for maybe a year myself, pretty much daily, and I knew Caitlin, but we weren't like so close. We just like see each other around and talk now and then we started talking one day and started realizing like we both, like, she's really into Burroughs and I'm really into Geisen. We're like, oh, let's start working on this together. And then we started like doing witchcraft together and collaborating and doing cut-ups together and recording. And it's been great. And I understand the Third Mind idea a lot better now because like Caitlin's just always around, you know, like, I don't know, like everyone's like, don't you miss her? And I'm like, I do miss her, of course, but it's also kind of like she's always there.
We should point out to listeners that she moved to Chicago. She's not dead. So that's, you know.
Yeah, she's not dead. She moved to Chicago. Yeah. It seems like it. Yeah, she moved to Chicago, but she's kind of always there. And I feel the same way about my husband, Carl. Like, we definitely have a third mind thing going on. And even though he's in Sweden, he's kind of always around. So, yeah, I understand that in a different level. And I feel like most people have had that experience too, like with partners that they're very close with. They're finishing each other's sentences and they like, oh, you called right when I was thinking about you and all this kind of stuff. Like, it's not unusual. It's pretty common. Everyone has these experiences, but everyone just kind of writes it off. But like, maybe people are connected on a more under the surface level than people like to realize. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about the book itself. You mentioned that it was essentially the intro to the currently unwritten thesis, but what was the point at which you decided to, put this into its own?
That was actually Carl's idea, who's the publisher, who I then married. It's been a string of events. He's Carl Abrahamson. He is a cultural entrepreneur, pioneer, as they call him. And I asked him to do this conference with me last year on psychoanalysis, art, and the occult. We've known each other for a few years. He does this annual, esoteric art journal called The Fenris Wolf every year. And we met in 2013, and then he was in psychoanalysis for many years, so he has appreciation for it. And so when I met him and he found out I was an analyst, he asked if I would want to write for this journal.
Oh, I thought he was looking for free sessions. Okay, sorry.
So I put in a few pieces into this journal, and then I decided to have this conference. And I thought, that like he seemed to have the same interests as me and the same kind of aesthetic. So I asked him to do this conference with me in London, which originally we were going to have at the Freud Museum, which was pretty excited. I had a conference in May of 2015 on systemic violence, which was really difficult to prepare for. It was a 3-day conference at Fordham University with a colleague, Manya Steinkohler. And after that, I was kind of at the dinner, and was drinking and just like really exhausted from studying violence and systemic violence and all the problems of our country and everything for months and months and months. And I was like, I really need to do something like creative art or something. And I had this idea to do like psychoanalysis in the occult and art. And then this analyst named Danny Nobis had just recently become the chair of the Freud Museum. And he was speaking at our violence conference. And he was like, you should have it at the Freud Museum. And I was like, you're going to let me have a conference on the occult at the Freud Museum?
Twist my arm.
And he's like, sure. So I was really excited about that. And then, it just turned out they can only hold 30 people or something. And I was like, we're going to have 20 speakers. So it's not going to work out. But, we ended up having it at a gallery instead. And then what we did was, invited all these artists who most of them are occultists too, like Genesis Bradford and John Balance and Val Denham and all these people. And we lined the gallery walls with this kind of esoteric art and then had the actual talks inside of the gallery space. And it was fantastic. And we had Val Denham played a concert. It was great. And I made sure to have we had British occultists and Irish Lacanian psychoanalysts and Langston, shamans and a voodoo priest, Santero and a Kimbanda Tata, all these different cultures and all these different fields, all in the same room talking to each other. And it was really fantastic. But, I ended up during Caitlin and I's talk on working with Burroughs and Geisen and the third mind and that sort of thing. I ended up kind of talking about how I become obsessed with doing these cut-ups. And then Carl approached me and said, you should put out a book of that. And Caitlin and I are already working on a book, in homage to the third mind with Fulgur Press. But the idea for that book is it's going to be an art book because they're an art book publisher. So we're actually doing scans of the cut-ups and Caitlin's great images, film stills and that sort of thing in her paintings. And then some writing that way. And the publisher actually had the idea to have it, instead of being just a regular book, to have it be a box. And so that each page can be individual and you can actually shuffle the book itself so that it's a giant cut up, and even maybe have some pages be vellum and have the typing there so you can lay the text over images and that sort of thing. So that's a really fun project. So when Carl had the idea to publish the cut-ups alone, we decided to transcribe them all so that it wouldn't kind of step on those toes, since those are going to be actual scans. So that's how this book happened.
Are you happy with the
Yeah, it was really fun. And it came together really quickly. I think he talked to me about doing it in like August, and it was out by November. So it was just like...
And then when did he propose? Or did you propose? Who proposed?
He proposed. He had brought it up along the way, and I actually made a joke that if Trump got elected, then he could talk to me about it again. And then he was like, so? And I was like, why not?
Because you figured you would need an escape route out of America.
Now I'm moving to Sweden.
That makes sense. Now, did that work? Not this, but the workshops you were holding or the events lead to the. You may as well tell us about Das Unbehagen, the group that you co-founded. Which, in fact, tell me all about it because I'm,
Yeah. Das Unbehagen is a group that was founded, I guess it's been like 4 or 5 years now. So basically, after I had this period of graduate school where I just basically learned how to work in hospitals and, do behavioral treatment with people that I wasn't at all interested in doing, I ended up coming to New York for this job at Woodhull Hospital and working in an HIV clinic here, which I loved. But again, it wasn't this kind of analytic work, which is what I really wanted to do. So I decided to go to psychoanalytic training, which is like another few years that you do after you already have your clinical degree or doctorate. So I went to New York Psychoanalytic because my friend Jameson Webster, who shares this office, was there. And we were both very disappointed with the training. It was nice to be reading Freud, but we kind of already read all the papers on our own, and the teachers weren't really giving us like anything new to think about. And it was very rigid, and I don't know, even though it was psychoanalytic content, I felt like it was still very like behavioral based. It's this brand of psychoanalysis that really to me isn't even psychoanalysis, that's called ego psychology. And it actually grew out of what Anna Freud did, who's Freud's daughter. So when Freud passed, he kind of like gave the torch to Anna Freud. And then everybody came to the U.S. because, World War II was happening. So when they came over here, they really started doing this ego psychology, which is really looking at all of your defenses. That's where all the names of like denial and repression, all these different defenses come in, like identification with the aggressor and that sort of thing. But it's really meant to like shore up your ego and kind of make it stronger. Which again, so you can like go to work and be a cog, but it doesn't really help you. I feel like psychoanalysis is best used when you see why you're doing what you're doing, and so you can break that down a bit and make different decisions so that you're not living in such a rigid ego structure, because then that rigid ego structure gets in your way. It's better to be able to go with the flow a little bit more, or at least become aware of it enough that you like see what you're doing. But I don't know, the ego psychology, the psychologists, they're really into giving these very long interpretations of like, where they like figure out like, oh, you're doing this now with your wife because your mother did this to you and whatever. And it's like the typical kind of way you think of like an analyst, just like telling you why you're doing everything, and it all has to do with your parents and that's it. Where I think it's much more useful as a psychologist or psychoanalyst to just keep asking open-ended questions to people so that they can kind of figure out and put the pieces together about what they're doing, and maybe once in a while give a suggestion or say, oh, this reminds me of so-and-so, or do you think, when has this happened before or something, but not like putting all of your views onto somebody like that.
Doesn't this remind you of the time your mother did X?
Yeah. And just like telling you, because that's what my analyst at that institute would do. And I just felt like, get off of me with your ideas, like leave me alone. I just found it very frustrating. Anyway, needless to say, they make you go through all these endless hoops that they can't even get into. But I just became very frustrated with the experience, and so did Jameson. And so after like 3 years of it, we both left, and Jameson wrote this, the way it actually happened is Jameson wrote this great book called Life and Death of Psychoanalysis. And it had just come out like right when we were leaving. It was her first book. And then she, at the dinner she had a funeral for psychoanalysis, which we had like casket and everything. And everybody gave like eulogies to Freud and psychoanalysis. It was like this big thing. We like carried the casket out. We were going to throw it in the Gowanus Canal. It was at Cabinet. And we were going to throw it in the Gowanus Canal, but they were like, we don't want to get in trouble. So we just like threw it over there. But anyway, we had this funeral, and then somebody at the dinner asked Jameson like why she had a funeral for psychoanalysis, and she said, well, I just hoped that if we finally put it to rest, like maybe something could be born anew. And then like literally a month later, she sent like 20 of us an email saying, you know, I know all of you, you don't all know each other, but I want to get you all in a room and see what would happen because you're all like great analysts, you know, and I want to put you all together. And so we like had a meeting and just started talking about the state of psychoanalysis and how it is dying because it's like all these really old men just like trying to keep their little clubs and like making people go through all these hoops, and they're giving this really like dead theory that's not useful and it's not resonating anymore. So yeah, I started a listserv. I was like, we should all be on a list together and start chatting. And that was like 2012, I guess. So like 5 years ago. And we've been chatting ever since. Now there's like 500 something people on there. Yeah. And we usually do, free classes every year, free lectures, all sorts of things. It's been great. And it's been a platform, like people constantly, they have ideas and they're like, would you want to do this or that? They'll write me. And I'm like, the whole point is that we're giving people a platform where you don't have to ask permission. Like we're all professionals. That was one of my frustrations with psychoanalytic training. It's like, I'm already a doctor. Like how many more hoops do I have to go through before I can do what I think is correct? Like, why do I have to keep doing what you are telling me I should be doing or thinking? You know, it's just like infinitely frustrating. So I keep telling people, like, you don't have to ask me if it's okay. If you have an idea, like, just send a note out to the listserv. Like, hey, I want to do something like this. I want to have a talk about this. And, like, see who else is interested, and put it together. And that's what happens. Like, someone will put out an idea. A bunch of other people will be interested. Somebody will get a room at their institute or like, NYU, or we'll use the office here or something like that. And then we'll just have the talk, you know? So it's, like, very collaborative and generative. It's great.
Has anyone tried hijacking in general and making it that, oh, this needs to be a movement and we need to get accredited with blah, blah, blah?
Yeah.
It's the nature of systems. I was just wondering how you cope with it.
We've had like a couple little times where we try to be as headless as possible, but there are like a few of us that have just been kind of in it since the beginning that have the idea of how it's supposed to remain open. But we have these general meetings once or twice a year so that new people can come in and kind of understand the ideas behind it, and so that it doesn't get hijacked. Nobody's tried to get us accredited or anything yet, but some people have like kind of just used it to their own advantage in a way where they like the whole idea is these events are supposed to be collaborative. It's not supposed to be a platform for one person to then just start
me and my theory.
Yeah. And like, I'm amazing and like, I run this thing. And it's like, no, these events are supposed to be collaborations. That's the point. And it's great if you want to do something here or there, but you can't just hijack it. Yeah. So we're actually kind of dealing with something, right now that's kind of brought to our attention, but we're trying to just like, let it play out and hopefully everything will run its course okay. You know, cause we don't want to start imposing law on people. It's better to keep it open, rather than starting that trend, because there's always going to be something or someone that somebody doesn't like, and there's nothing you can do about that.
I like the idea of an anarchist psychoanalyst gang. Yeah. I think it's kind of a neat concept. If I was, doing a post-apocalyptic novel, you'd be, cruising along the wasteland and
Maybe
stuff.
That's what we're doing.
See?
We're all living it out.
How much do your patients generally know about you outside of the room, as it were? Like, how aware are they of the witchcraft, the cut up, et cetera, generally?
It varies.
Yeah. And does it become a detriment at any point?
It varies. You can definitely tell the patients who just have never looked me up, which I think is great. And you can also it happens when like someone hasn't looked me up and then they do. And they're like, what?
Whoa, Nelly. I told her that.
Yeah. Like I had one patient who like was kind of taken aback for a second, but then like, I'm still the same person, you know, and she didn't want to be prejudiced against me for being a witch, quote unquote, you know? So yeah, it definitely varies. I think some people come to me because they read about me and that sort of thing.
Do they come in with a certain set of expectations about what it means that you have to disabuse them of, or?
Yeah, I mean, some people have wanted me to be more proactive and like do rituals with them or that sort of thing, and that's not what I'm doing here.
Yeah.
So it's more like, the idea is more like, I'm not going to judge you for having a different worldview than the one that we're all living within here. You know, like it's not, you can talk about your experiences and I'm not going to be like, we need to send you to a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
So I just try to explain it to them that way, that it's less about doing that kind of work together and more about just being open to be able to freely speak about whatever you want without worrying about it or being judged in any way. You know, they're definitely separate.
Yeah. I was just curious because it's, even in my professional life, I was involved in this big work project at one point, and somebody after 6 months looked me up and discovered this whole thing, and it made me more interesting to them. Oh yeah, they were happy because it was, you know, they couldn't talk to me about family or anything else because I don't tell anyone anything. And then they discovered, oh, Gil's got this weird thing. So yeah, it became a basis of conversation. Yeah, not really, but you know, I fake it really, really well. So
then I had like one patient, like some patients get way too attached to it. And like one patient, once they looked me up and found out that I do cut-ups, and I decided it was like the coolest analyst in the world and they could never see another analyst. So I was like the only one to solve their problem, you know? Yeah. And it's like, that's just not true.
Yeah, how much of a burden does that become generally? Again, I've managed to stay out of therapy all these years by hiding. I'm just stayed out all these years. But how much is that sense of dependence?
I mean, it's part of the treatment. It's just part of transference, and like it's definitely like a transference is like your mommy daddy issues kinds of thing, like putting that upon the object in front of you. So people do it to their partners, people do it to authority figures, people do it to like celebrities, you know. And they're supposed to do it to the analyst. Like you're supposed to put your transference on me and like kind of act out all the things you didn't get to act out with them so that you can have like a better experience and someone that's like not telling you what to do or judging you or whatever. So you can like get through that and then like move forward. So you're not stuck in this cycle of like repeatedly trying to get this love or attention or whatever that you didn't feel like you got, you know? So it's kind of part of the process. But yeah, I mean, I definitely have like my own practice. Like I definitely have to practice self-care and like go to yoga and take care of myself to do this job. Cause it's definitely, I mean, people putting a lot on you all day long and that's just reality. So yeah, you have to take care of yourself.
I have no idea what that means really. I'm just kidding. Your literary background?
What do you mean?
How much of a reader were you growing up?
Oh, I sometimes would read a book like every day. Yeah.
I kind of guessed from the sheer volume of books that are piled up here that are not just psychiatric books. So
yeah,
you know,
yeah, I read constantly. Yeah. I have a book problem.
It's not a problem unless you, like I did, run out of space or, you know, other people run out of money, I guess, to buy. But that's what libraries are for.
Yeah, my husband's talking about like having a whole other house so we can have a proper library. This is a book problem too.
I gutted the downstairs of my house and turned it into a library, and that really, and then ended up filling it within 6 months of that time. So now I'm already kind of putting
goals.
I had to start buying book carts. That's a great one because then you can pretend you're going to get rid of those books at some point, but it doesn't really happen. They stay. Ooh. So, but they become furniture like here.
Yeah,
so,
I like that.
I'm perfectly down with it. Since we are in a psychiatric office right, or a psychiatrist's office right now, what do your folks think of what your career has turned out as?
Oh,
is it wrong to ask about your parents?
No.
Okay.
I think they're getting used to it. I mean, they definitely were happy when I wanted to go to grad school and become a doctor. My mom's an artist, like hippie, like friends with Crosby, Stills and Nash, and that kind of thing. And
what sort of art?
She does paintings, oil paintings, abstract, usually female forms. And then my dad's like a Vietnam vet who was on a submarine in Nam and was a construction worker. his whole life. So he's like a craftsman, builds things. So no doctors in my family or psychologists or anything like that at all. And I think they were happy for me to go to school and get an education as like kind of a way to a better life sort of thing. And I think the turn, because pretty much when I moved to Sweden, I'm going to be seeing patients still and definitely still be doing like lectures and conferences and that sort of thing. But my private practice isn't going to be like my main job anymore. It's going to be a lot lesser. And I'm going to work a lot more on writing and art and the cut-ups and that sort of thing, and like making films and that sort of stuff. So I think at first when I told them I was going to do that, they were kind of like, who gets a doctorate and then like goes to be an artist? And I was like, me? It's like, I don't know. It kind of seems to me like exactly like something I would do. And I'm not going to like give it completely. I really like doing psych testing, which I was doing this morning. So I'm thinking that could be something I continue doing, as well. I don't know like the laws of the Swedish government. I don't want to get into like their medical care system.
Now we've got underground psychiatric anarchist gang. That's even better. That's cool.
And psychoanalysts can do that. That's the thing. Like that's part of us. We're like subversive, and like I'm really into like lay analysts, which are analysts that are trained that they don't necessarily have a mental health clinical degree, so they're not necessarily psychologists or social workers or medical doctors. And that's how it started out. Freud would train anybody that was interested in training, and he would analyze them and train them to be an analyst and then send them off to analyze other people. So it didn't matter if you were like a writer or an artist or a car mechanic or whatever, he would train you. And I feel like that's why the field was much more interesting in the beginning, because you're bringing all these different perspectives, and you don't necessarily have to have a degree in like psychology or social work or psychiatry to understand how to kind of work with people and do the psychoanalytic process. You need to be trained in that. But like I said, all the training I got through school, I had to kind of unlearn, and I barely use any of it. So I think it's great for, like, I have friends that have PhDs in literature, and then they go to psychoanalytic training and learn that way. So I think it's great to do that. And, I know people that have moved that, like, instead of like becoming a psychologist in another country, then you just become an analyst and you just work that way. And then you just pay like out of pocket instead of getting into like the health insurance system. So underground rogue, subversive psychoanalysts. We exist.
Sounds awesome.
To me, that's like how psychoanalysis should be. Yeah. It was subversive, and like in World War II, when it was banned, there was like psychoanalysts meeting secretly to like talk about theory and stuff, and like they could get killed for that. A lot of them did get killed. A lot of them were put into camps or like jumped out windows and committed suicide, so they didn't have to go to camps. So like, I think that's just, it's hardcore. You believe in it that much, you're going to meet and talk about it secretly.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Well, I look forward to seeing more of your art from Sweden, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, I know you got a spoken word record.
Traveling here too.
I would hope.
Oh yeah, there's so.
Yeah. Besides the book, what's the what other?
So the things that are happening now. I don't know if you have a cassette player, but I have.
I'm sorry. I'll make a terrible joke about it not being like 1993 anymore, but go on. Sorry.
I don't have a cassette player.
Yeah.
But we just had, Carl and I had a cassette come out. So I basically, part of the process of doing the cut-ups is that I would record myself reading them, because Burroughs said it's important to say them out loud. And I found that saying them out loud is different than just reading them for some reason. So I started doing that, and then I started recording myself reading the cut-ups, and then like I'd have like a playlist on my iTunes of the cut-ups on shuffle. So it'd be like shuffle of all these cut-ups while I was doing cut-ups, and I'd go and do these like cut-up psychoses states for like 8 hours and just do cut-ups. It's really fun. Haven't done that in a while. But anyways, sometimes I'd send them to Carl before we were dating. And just be like, do you think this is interesting? This is interesting. He was like, yeah, these are great. And then he started putting them to music, and now we have these kind of little albums coming out. So the first one just came out, or actually the official release date is May 6th. It's called Cut to Fit the Mouth. And then the same day that comes out, the book the Fenris Wolf, which is a cultural journal that Carl does. We made a special edition of it from the conference that we had last year. So it's the papers from the Psychoanalysis, Art, and Occult Conference collected into a Fenris Wolf volume. So that comes out May 6th as well. We're having a party here for that on that day. And then May 5th, there's a digital album that's coming out that's basically, I think it's 18 tracks. We asked 17 different artists I sent them cut-ups and they mixed them however they wanted. So we just actually put that together and sent it off today. So it takes about 2 weeks. It'll come out on May 5th on like Spotify and iTunes and all of that. And that's called Message 23. And then Switching Mirrors has an album. So basically I went to Portugal in October with Carl and recorded reading poems from the book all around Portugal at different spots, like the Boca de Inferno and Pessoa's office and all this sort of thing. And then Carl mixed them together and made an album out of that. So there's going to be an LP of Switching Mirrors poems on this album, this label called Erototox Decodings, which is out of Asheville. Yeah.
You're productive.
It. Yeah.
Geez, I feel terrible about myself. I thought I'd come in here and feel a little bit better, but but cool. Vanessa, thanks so much for coming on the Virtual Memories Show.
Thank you.
And that was Vanessa Sinclair. Her new book of cut-up poetry is Switching Mirrors from Trap Art Press. You should check out www.chaosofthethird.mind.com to learn about the art she makes with Caitlin Foisey. Also, hit up dasunbehagen.org to learn more about that underground anarchist psychoanalyst gang she belongs to. And that's DASUNBEHAGEN.org. Das Unbehagen. Now, once we wrapped up the main session, I asked Vanessa, so, who are you reading? If you want to hear her answer to that, you'll need to become a supporter of the Virtual Memories Show so you can get access to our bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. You can do that at patreon.com/VMSpod or at paypal.me/VMSpod. I've got all sorts of goals and goodies in place for supporters of the show, including that podcast. And in fact, I just posted a huge episode covering the guests from the first quarter of 2017. It's about 40 minutes long, amazing episode, really good material about who these guys are and what they're reading. But it's only for patrons of the podcast. There's also a patron-only blog, handwritten show notes for every episode, series of ebooks I'm still hoping to launch this summer, and more. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod and support the art of fine conversation. Now, this one was recorded at Vanessa's office in New York. It was part of the day that I recorded with Sharif Majdalani. That was 2 episodes ago. And combined, that involved the George Washington Bridge toll, parking at a garage on 95th Street, subway fare, and, of course, coffee. So it's around $50 or $60 to do both of those shows. Plus, I took a day off from work. If you want to help defray some of the costs of the Virtual Memories Show, like web hosting, travel, equipment, coffee, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and make a one-time or recurring donation. Or contact me directly. I'll let you know how to send me a check or something if you want, or other neat goodies. Special thanks go out to Kevin Katila, John Wendler, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Wallace Wilde Manozzi, Andrew Mason, Greg Tanner, Garrett Zecker, Craig P. Steffen, and Ron Slate for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories Show. We've got the full list of show supporters at chimeraobscura.com/VM. Our music for this episode is Nothing's Gonna Bring Me Down by David Bayerwald, used with permission from the artist. David was one half of David and David, who made the absolutely phenomenal 80s album Welcome to the Boomtown. He's working on a reunion project with the other David, David Ricketts, and you can find out more and support that at facebook.com/DavidandDavidMusic. And that's it for this week's Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with the great artist, illustrator, animator, and ad man, R.O. Bleckman. Till next time, you can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store or at soundcloud.com/VMSpod. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSpod, on Facebook at facebook.com/virtualmemoriesshow, and at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com. And if you like this show, please go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and review for this podcast. That'll help us build a bigger audience. Till next time, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you are awesome. Keep it that way.